Rebellion, Perversion, and Youth, a study of the Japanese New Wave. In this comparative study, I'll be analyzing how rebellion, delinquency, and radical youth culture is represented in cinema, and how the influence of the Japanese New Wave is depicted in film, through a comparison of Stanley Kubrick's 1971 film, A Clockwork Orange, and Toshio Matsumoto's 1969 film, Funeral Parade of Roses. Many of the themes and ideas that originated during this era in cinema are reflections of the country's post-war state during the 1950s, when Japan was undergoing a drastic transformation. Japan had just surrendered in World War II and was under the occupation of the United States, which led Japanese cinema to face heavy censorship against films that did not properly represent Western ideals. The censorship led to an era of cinema called Japanese Golden Age, which produced some of Japan's highest-grossing movies, such as Godzilla, Seven Samurai, and Tokyo Story, to name a few. This film movement inspired filmmakers to shift into creating experimental, avant-garde films that pushed the boundaries of what was expected during the Golden Age. Japanese filmmakers during the 60s and 70s shared similar ideas to French New Wave directors, such as Jean-Luc Godard, who created films that shifted away from traditional story structures and focused more on mise-en-scene elements, tone, and mood, as opposed to story and character development. The French New Wave and the Japanese New Wave had very similar aims, despite the Japanese New Wave presenting more confrontational themes to question authoritarianism and political themes. Japanese New Wave filmmakers at this time were accused of copying French New Wave filmmakers, despite this being an impossibility, since both movements originated at the same time. The French New Wave gained more global recognition with more widely acclaimed filmmakers like Jean-Luc Godard. Nagisa Oshima, one of the most prolific Japanese New Wave directors, responded to claims that his films were an imitation of Jean-Luc Godard's films by stating, "I don't agree specifically with any of his positions, but I agree with his general attitude in confronting political themes seriously in film." These film movements both serve as mediums for filmmakers to respond to gaps in generational values and to challenge authoritarianism in politics and in film style. A Clockwork Orange and Funeral Parade of Roses are justifiable for comparison because they both depict themes of radicalized youth culture through different lenses and camera lenses. And to note how the thematic issues of morality and authoritarianism are presented in such eerily similar stylistic ways suggests something very specific yet universal about youth, rebellion, and the conscious of values that are often in conflict. Both films use similar film elements and stylistic choices to convey these ideas, which can be observed through an analysis of characterization, sound design, and shot composition. Stanley Kubrick holds the reputation of being one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, for his depiction of deeply psychological themes, creating masterpieces in almost every genre, and for his incorporation of new technology to present dystopian themes. Kubrick's film, A Clockwork Orange, provides an example of the influence of the Japanese New Wave on Western cinema, as it depicts youth culture by presenting the perspective that delinquency in youth comes from the morally gray gap between generations, and adolescent values often create new social-cultural paradigms and understandings, which are often quickly labeled delinquent or perverse. Our point of view in Clockwork is Alex, who views the world through the lens of his demented, psychotic mind. Because of his behavior, Alex is detained to be fixed and altered, undergoing psychological rehabilitation, which essentially just conditions Alex to think and act in the way that society and authority figures deem acceptable. These themes resonate with the Japanese New Wave by highlighting the influence of authority on the desire to go against norms and expectations, and presenting the idea that society conditions individuals so that abnormality, diversity, and deviations from societal expectations are criminalized, eradicated, and made into taboo topics. The use of sound design in this film contributes to both the uneasy and dystopian themes of this film, and is often a motif linked to Alex's high pleasures like sex, rape, and murder. The use of classical music presents the concept of conditioning into this film, as it juxtaposes the themes of violence and delinquency presented in this film with Alex's genuine appreciation of beauty and high culture. Alex's psychological connection to Beethoven is in a sort of self-conditioning, by associating his passion for Beethoven with his delinquent and torturous acts. This plays an important role in the characterization of Alex, as he later becomes conditioned to feel ill when engaging in delinquent and torturous acts, which also means he would feel ill when listening to Beethoven, which is his true punishment and torture, and Kubrick's point in the film, that good behavior ultimately cannot be enforced by authoritarian means. Matsumoto similarly uses sound design in Funeral Parade of Roses by using classical music to contrast the fast and chaotic setting of Tokyo and the lives of the characters in the film, as well as to highlight the themes of self-discovery regarding identity, gender, and sexuality, by juxtaposing taboos and conventional values. We see sexual, gender, and behavioral diversity presented in evocative ways alongside classical music, which works to glamorize queer culture. This somewhat jarring technique of sound design choice and provocative imagery is a trope in Japanese New Wave cinema, which often uses sound design in unconventional and even political ways. The way that shots are composed in both films are also subject to comparison, as they both embody the themes that resonate with the Japanese New Wave. Shot choice and composition often portrays the discomfort that is present in youth culture and communicates the movement's aim of portraying the country's general discomfort and instability by creating a purposefully uncomfortable tone. A notable example that can be observed from the opening scenes of both films is the use of a tracking shot that ends in a close-up of the characters' faces. In A Clockwork Orange, the shot sets the tone for Alex's diverse and perversive character through his sinister makeup and expression, and sets a very similar tone for Peter's character in Funeral Parade of Roses. The use of close-ups in both films conveys subjective information about the psychology of each character. In A Clockwork Orange, this technique also works alongside the idea that Alex, though exaggerated into a monster in this sci-fi dystopia world, is essentially a teenager who is conditioned to act in ways that are perhaps against his nature. In Funeral Parade of Roses, Matsumoto's use of close-ups is used to focus on the expression of the characters, which often portray a face of alienation and otherness due to societal disapproval. The use of long takes in these opening scenes sets the tone of a stylized and dreamy world and allows for both an aspect of intimacy and discomfort to be felt. This technique also highlights the mise-en-scene elements in each frame, which is used for world building in these highly formalized set designs. The use of mise-en-scene elements in these films create a disturbing representation of both the dystopia presented in A Clockwork Orange and the vibrant, colorful, queer culture presented in Funeral Parade of Roses. In his film, Kubrick incorporates brightly colored environments and costumes to represent the vibrancy and excitement of youth culture, but also creates a contrast by presenting environments that pertain dark and disturbing elements, such as clinical institutions and dark alleyways. This contrast can also be observed through Matsumoto's use of mise-en-scene elements. Queer characters are often observed wearing eccentric patterns and textures, and the atmosphere surrounding the characters is often made of vibrant elements, such as bright city lights, street art, and populated environments, which alludes to both the excitement and liveliness of youth culture, as well as to highlight the characters' alienation from the crowds due to society's inability to properly accept the characters' diversity. These elements allow for a representation of New Wave filmmakers' response to both the oppressive and confining standards for cinema and norms in society presented prior to the movement, as well as the vibrancy and liberation of producing films that don't fit that criteria. Although Kubrick was not directly involved in the Japanese New Wave, he was heavily influenced by this film and this movement, despite lack of direct academic evidence to prove it. This can be observed through a comparison of several scenes in each film, which present nearly identical film elements and structure. Film movements like this one allow for perspectives regarding political stances to be voiced and marked through a medium that is transcendent of its particular context, and that can be observed and analyzed to better understand the sentiments beneath these historical periods. Like other New Wave movements that were simultaneously occurring, Japanese New Wave filmmakers showcase the realities of their time through stylistic interpretations of genuine youth, rebellion, and culture.